But then the question is, why have a primary? Right? I mean, you're either going to have it one way or the other way. And the party, if it's going to be a small d Democratic party, really has to choose, and clearly hasn't chosen. In fact, it's got a system built in to, if it wants to, make sure that the party elders, the institution, the establishment, can literally thwart the will of the people.
How does it work in the Republican Party?
Well, the Republican Party is a winner-take-all system in their primaries, and so that has essentially, at least to this point, negated any real party control in terms of the votes. I mean, there's all sorts of party control with who gets the money. Remember George Bush back in 2000, he didn't need a superdelegate system because he had all the money in that primary. But the winner-take-all system means that there isn't that question at the end. I mean, in the Democratic Party, the proportional representation means that the superdelegates themselves could play, again, and Hillary Clinton, I think, is banking on this, a decisive role in overturning the will of the election.
It's interesting, the contradiction for Hillary Clinton, because on the one hand, she's saying Michigan and Florida should be counted because we believe in one person, one vote. How can we exclude the population of 2 states? And on the other hand, banking on the superdelegates.
That's exactly right. And what I find really appalling, actually, is the stuff about Michigan, where she's saying, she's complaining that Barack Obama got any delegates because she said, you know, he didn't run in the primary, and yet she's also saying that the Michigan primary should count. Right, it should really count, even though he was the one who respected the rules and didn't put his name in. So she's basically saying it wasn't a real election, but he shouldn't get anything anyway because he wasn't involved. It's really, the logic, as I heard somebody joke, the consistency is that she will say anything in order for herself to get elected.
Do you think the superdelegates will now be challenged after this year? The whole system will be challenged.
I certainly hope so, and I certainly think that they are an outdated, antiquated system. I mean, the problem is that I think what could happen, if Barack Obama loses, I think Hillary Clinton will make the case, a sort of I told you so case. I don't think it'll be fair, but she will say, you see, the superdelegates should have put me in, should have nominated me. And she might even make the case in a 2012 presidential campaign in general. That might be the theme. I told you so. I told you we needed to nominate me and not somebody who was less experienced. So if Obama loses, I think the superdelegate system, there could be a case to keep them. If Obama wins, I think it will be a complete repudiation of them.
What would be the sector of society that would push for the superdelegates to be abolished, the whole system? Where do you see that coming from as you travel around the country?
I see it coming from people who are appalled at the system. I think rank and file volunteers, campaign volunteers who are involved in this are really didn't know the system existed, are appalled by the system.
No one understands it.
No one really understands it. I certainly think that the
But I think that's true not just of the superdelegates, it's true of the entire system. Because yes. This difference between caucuses and primaries, or primaries in some states where you get more delegates depending on how many people voted in the previous election rather than in the current election. So the entire system is a hodgepodge.
We haven't even dealt with the Electoral College because that doesn't come into play at this moment.
And I would say that in general, I think this has been an educational experience for people to understand yet another example of where democracy is really thwarted in the very institutions of our political system. I mean, we have an electoral system, an Electoral College system, as you mentioned, that's completely undemocratic.
Explain it.
You've got a system where states have electoral votes that are awarded basically on a winner-take-all system, and so unless you're in a state that's very closely divided, the presidential candidates don't really pay much attention to you or your state because the winner-take-all system means it's less of a one person, one vote. If you live in a state that one candidate won by one vote, all of your electoral votes go to that candidate. It's a completely undemocratic
You also
system.
have a situation where the small states have disproportionate power because they at least have 2 senators in a lot of these very small states. That's extra electoral votes.
Absolutely.
What about the movement for a national popular vote?
It's a hugely, hugely important movement, and let me explain how it works. You know, the Electoral College is in the Constitution, so it's very difficult to get rid of something that's in the Constitution. And so through the Progressive States Network, which I work with, and through other groups, you can create a state legislative way to solve this Electoral College problem. What you do is you get your state to pass a bill that says we will award our Electoral College votes to the winner of the national popular vote, but only as soon as a majority of states representing a majority of the Electoral College also agree to the same thing. So that what happens is you make sure that once you have states representing, what is it, 272, 273 Electoral College votes who agree to this compact, then you've got a situation where you've effectively overridden the Electoral College vote and created a completely democratic system based on the national popular vote. You have a system that guarantees whoever wins the national popular vote wins the election.
You've also been very critical of MoveOn.
I've been somewhat critical of MoveOn. I'm a fan of their leaders. I like them as people. I think that they've been part of an anti-war strategy that has tried to focus all of the attention on the Republicans. And I think it's been more of a partisan strategy than a strategy to end the war. And I think that's strategically I disagree with it. I also think they're somewhat of an undemocratic organization, small d. And I think that I use them as an example. They're just a very big organization. That on the progressive side, we have a lot of organizations that do not have small d democratic control. When you think about MoveOn, there's no real way to tell the organization that you don't like what they're doing or you want them to go in a different direction other than emailing them. You can email them or you can take their poll and vote in a poll, but there's no democratic ownership. It's different when you think of a group like Democracy for America. If you go onto Democracy for America's website, if I'm a Democracy for America member and you and I can communicate one-to-one through the technology. With MoveOn, you can only communicate essentially, and there are a couple of exceptions, but essentially through the central junction box. And so it really hasn't created a small d democratic ownership. And as I say in the book, if we want to create a social movement, you have to make people, the mass public, feel ownership over that movement, real ownership, through democratic control.
One of the things you deal with as well is the emergence of Lou Dobbs as a populist figure and the contradiction of both some of his right-leaning and left-leaning policies. We've had him on the show here, and be interested in your further elucidating for us what are his left-wing populist perspectives.
Well, I think out of anybody in the major cable news, he's the only person who, for instance, talks about corporate power. He's the only person who talks about the inequities of our lobbyist-written trade policy. He's really the only person who even acknowledges what he calls the war on the middle class. Now, what I'm critical of him in the book is that, and I think it's deceptive, is that he segments the issues he talks about. Right. So the best example is he talks about immigration. And he's very, very basically anti-illegal immigration. And he talks about free trade. And never the twain shall meet, right? There's never a discussion about, hey, wait a minute, when you pass a NAFTA that wipes out a local farming economy, for instance, in Mexico, that you're going to create a situation where Mexicans are going to want to come to this country because they've been thrown off their land by our trade policy. Never the twain shall meet. And I think he doesn't mix them or doesn't meld them. And I was on his radio show yesterday and we argued about this. And I basically say in the book he doesn't meld them because that message is more of a for lack of a better term, a holistic message. You're actually looking at the problem and not just symptoms. You're not just riling people up. You're actually going to the heart of the problem. I think his show taps into an unfortunate desire when he talks about immigration of xenophobia, of scapegoating immigrants. And I think that's where I disagree with him. Explain,
David Sirota, what's scaring Wall Street.
Well, I think what's scaring Wall Street is the upsurge in participation, Wall Street and money power has its best influence, its most impactful influence, and people are not paying attention. And I think the crises that we are experiencing now, a housing crisis, a financial crisis, a Middle East crisis, is focusing people's attention. I think what's particularly scaring Washington, even beyond the political involvement in political campaigns, because when people get involved in political campaigns, it means lobbyists and big money has less power. But what I think really scares them is the direct action. When I was at that ExxonMobil shareholder meeting...
Yeah, just give us the scene.
Yeah, I was at the ExxonMobil shareholder meeting, and I was with a group of religious shareholders, people representing religious institutions.